When attacking Chasiv Yar, it is very difficult for the Russians to use Ivanivska and Bodanivka as cover. Just take a look at what happened to the Russians when they were spotted on the edge of the village. There are at least 20 of them, and only one Ukrainian drone is necessary to handle all of them. And if the occupiers are at a disadvantage, this is what happens to them. At first, the soldiers try to shoot down the Ukrainian Armed Forces reconnaissance drone. But in a moment, a tank with infantrymen arrives and clears the enemy positions. The Russian army advanced along the cordon and had their first success. This was seen by them as a weakness in the Ukrainian defenses, and from the beginning, what was considered a reconnaissance battle gradually turned into full-fledged combat operations. The invaders began to bring in equipment to attack the town of Vovchansk. This is one of the first tanks to be destroyed by an ATGM. These APCs were stopped by Ukrainian kamikaze drones. New turtle tanks are also here. But that's not a problem for the Ukrainian defenders. Here, the drone pilot spotted a parking lot of Russian armored vehicles. A few kamikaze drones have left them nothing but ashes. And this APC with infantry couldn't even make it to its destination. These two stranded Russian tanks were preparing to head for the Ukrainian borders, but the AFU spotted them in time. The first artillery shells flew past, but it scared everyone who was there, and the tanks were left unprotected, which allowed the drone pilots to burn them to the ground without any problems. The invaders are still short on equipment in this region, and the infantry is heavily suffering because of it. Here, the group was attacked by a mortar. Here, they were destroyed by a Ukrainian ATGM. And in these moments, the drone pilot dropped a grenade right on the heads of the orcs. We regularly publish new uncensored videos separately for our sponsors. A subscription costs only a few dollars. These tanks shelled the positions of the AFU near Vovchansk. The UAV pilots followed them to their stopping point and destroyed them with attack drones at the first opportunity. Here's what's left of one of them. Now, Vovchansk is being hit with bombs like this. But the real threat of a land assault on Chasiv Yar arose after the fall of Bakhmut in May 2023. The tactics of the Russians are very similar to the ones they used in Avdiivka and Bakhmut. The Russian army is using a large number of aerial bombs and plans to attack the city from the north and south, with the main goal of cutting the supply line. This semi-envelopment is supposed to be completed with a frontal attack on Chasiv Yar. The attacks on Ivanivska and Bodanivka began almost at the same time. Let's see how it went. Through the drone camera, we see 4 APCs moving towards the village. Ukrainian artillery starts firing. Some of the vehicles manage to break through to the forest belt. Failure catches up with the first of them. The APC explodes on a mine. Notice how many shells are coming from the defense. But so far, no precise hits. The camera is pulling back to get information about all the attackers. The second APC manages to land the infantry, which the third group is unable to do. An anti-tank mine made it impossible. The Russian infantry was in a very bad position. There was no cover. The vehicles were hit, and the Ukrainian artillery already knew their coordinates. Realizing this, the last APC tries to break through a little further, but their plans are foiled by a kamikaze drone. And the infantry we saw earlier is unlikely to be able to hurt anyone ever again. The Ukrainians were trying everything they could to keep the enemies out of the village. In some cases, drones stopped attacks like this. In other cases, cluster munitions were used. But something goes wrong. The Russians broke through day after day, and the situation turned into this, with tanks and APCs moving freely across the field without any obstacles. Here, we have several Russian Turtle APCs, trying to break through to the Ukrainian positions. Take a look at this. It's a rusty Soviet-era piece of junk. The first one is hit by a mine, and immediately afterwards we see a kamikaze drone hit the second one. Because of the shortage of ammunition, drones were almost the main weapon on these lines. The Russian APC is firing on Ukrainian positions from east of the village. With one precise strike, the drone stops the shelling. At the same time, this tin can tried to break through further, but was also stopped. Every day, the attacks intensified, and the Ukrainians decided to blow up the bridge. This little guy did a great job. Apparently, at that moment, it was a surprise for the Russians, and later, we see this footage of the bridge being blown up. A large column was moving towards Ivanivska. The AFU were ready for this attack. The first target is blown up on a mine. An accurate shot from a javelin hits the second target. A drone strike, cluster munitions fire, and the attack is no more. The AFU destroyed a lot of equipment during the attacks on these villages. But they were still occupied. It's incredibly difficult to defend a position when such resources are spent on it. So, the Russians decided to advance in large groups with air support. Columns of armored vehicles moved towards the city in several directions. The first armored vehicle explodes on a mine. Usually this doesn't bother the invaders, and they don't hesitate to try to break through. But here, for unknown reasons, the rest of the vehicles turn around and move back. The second column suffers the same fate. After hitting the first APC, the rest turn around. Some still manage to break through, closer to the city, perhaps even landing troops. But a moment later, the vehicles were already on fire. All of this is happening under air cover. Imagine what it's like to be there right now. And the Ukrainian soldiers are experiencing this day after day. The Russians are not stopping their attacks on many fronts. On the eastern border, this convoy is trapped. Ukrainian artillery starts firing as soon as the enemy gets on radar. Something slowed down one tank. It made the entire column an easy target. Within moments, it was spectacularly destroyed. The tank that broke through first is also burning brightly. Another explosion. And the infantry who managed to escape were caught by cluster munitions. Take a look at what's left after this attack. Useless metal and ash. And this is in the Avdiivka region. The Russians have also become active there, and went on the offensive. The first APC rides along the trail of already burned up equipment and naturally steps on a mine. In short time, the invader's vehicle turns into this. The next APC is destroyed by an artillery shell with incredible accuracy. Another group of tanks moves on a side road. The first of them drives over a mine, and as it rolls, several kamikaze drones deliver devastating blows to it from different directions.
A Ukrainian FPV kamikaze drone struck a Russian car in a garage where 2 Russian military men were located in the city of Novaya Kakhovka. This moment was recorded by a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone, and the operators realized that it made sense to attack when they got into the car. So they could immediately destroy both transport and military personnel. That's pretty much how it all turned out. The Russian military got into the car and began to start it slowly. Ukrainian drone operators took advantage of this pause by launching FPV kamikaze drones. There was excellent news from the Cherson direction, namely, the soldiers of the 137th Separate Marine Battalion and the 35th Separate Marine Brigade demonstrated exceptional skill. The video begins with 3 Russian intelligence officers returning from a combat mission, looking for a place to stay for the night, and deciding to stay in a destroyed house. They believe that this place will be safe in their opinion. If the house has already been destroyed, then it is unlikely that an attack will land there again. In addition, a destroyed house attracts less attention than a whole one, which helps them hide from the eyes of the Ukrainian military and local residents. There was excellent news from the Donetsk direction, namely, the fighters of the attack drone company demonstrated an impressive moment when a Russian infantry fighting vehicle along with its crew came under attack from an FPV drone. The video begins with a Ukrainian FPV drone approaching a Russian infantry fighting vehicle, which is firing intensely at Ukrainian military positions in one of the villages near Marinka. Drone operators carefully coordinate their actions to inflict maximum damage on the enemy. The video shows how the drone approaches the infantry fighting vehicle and delivers an accurate strike. A moment later, a powerful explosion is heard, followed by the ignition of ammunition. A Ukrainian FPV kamikaze drone struck a Russian car in which the commanding staff of one of the units was located in the city of Novaya Kakhovka. The video begins with the Russian commander saying goodbye to his colleagues near a military unit. Then he gets into the car, where 2 military men are already waiting for him. The car slowly moves away and heads to one of the local courtyards. The car can be seen slowly moving through the narrow streets until it finally stops at one of the houses. This moment becomes critical as Ukrainian drone operators decide to take action. A Ukrainian FPV kamikaze drone flies up to the car. Suddenly, there is a powerful explosion. There was excellent news from the Donetsk direction, namely, the paratroopers of the 77th Separate Airmobile Brigade, using an FPV drone, inflicted serious damage to the Russian Turam-2 anti-aircraft missile system. The video begins with the Ukrainian FPV drone already in flight, heading towards its target. It was a specially equipped drone with an extended range, capable of covering significant distances and performing complex tasks. The footage shows how the drone approaches the Russian Turam-2 air defense system, which is actively rotating the radar to detect Ukrainian targets. This means that the complex was active and ready for battle. The Russian Turam-2 air defense system, in theory, could jam the signal of the Ukrainian drone used to detect and attack it. The video begins with the Ukrainian drone recording the movements of 5 Russian special forces. They move carefully down the street, clearly trying not to attract attention. The special forces are heading to an ordinary civilian house, which they plan to use as a temporary deployment point. The video shows how the blast wave shakes the house, knocking out doors and windows. Dust and debris fly in all directions. The special forces who were near the front door find themselves at the epicenter of the explosion. There is no exact information about the condition of the Russian soldiers after the explosion, but it is safe to say that they were seriously injured and possibly killed. There was excellent news from the Donetsk direction, namely, soldiers of the 35th Separate Marine Brigade destroyed a large command post of the Russian invaders in the village of Urshenoy with 2 high-precision aerial bombs, IDAM and AIS. It is reported that the Ukrainian armed forces destroyed a large base of the Russian occupiers with high-precision Western ADAM and ASM bombs. More precisely, the Ukrainian military destroyed a large command post where they made important decisions on the defense of nearby settlements. Russian combat vehicles were also stored and serviced nearby, and an ammunition depot was located. And it is obvious that the operators of the unmanned aerial vehicle transmitted the coordinates of the target to the calculation of the multiple launch rocket system. And the projectile guided by the coordinates hit exactly the building with the occupiers in one of the captured settlements. And what do you think about it? Write your opinion in the comments under this video, give a like, subscribe to the channel to keep up with the latest news. There was excellent news from the Donetsk direction, namely, the soldiers of the 15th Separate Artillery Reconnaissance Brigade Black Forest managed to destroy the Russian Buk anti-aircraft missile system using the HIMARS multiple launch rocket system. The video begins with a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone spotting a Russian Buk missile system consisting of two vehicles. The first vehicle is a transport loading installation, the second is a radar station, which works in tandem with the main complex. The complex was located in an open area, where it was as if in the palm of the hand of a Ukrainian drone. Without wasting any time, the scout transmitted the coordinates of the complex to the HIMARS Morse operators. A moment later, HIMARS made a precise strike at the indicated coordinates. First, the strike hit the radar station. The explosion was powerful, and you can see how the station instantly goes out of order. Then, the second strike hits the transport loading installation. There was excellent news from the Donetsk direction, namely, the fighters of the 72nd Separate Mechanized Brigade Bulava and the Shadow unit demonstrated an impressive moment. When two Russian attack aircraft tried to hide under their damaged armored vehicles from the attack of Ukrainian FPV drones. The video begins with a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone spotting three Russian attack aircraft hiding in a disabled armored vehicle. Realizing that they were being pursued by Ukrainian FPV drones, they were afraid to come out of hiding. At some point, one of them noticed that a Ukrainian drone was following them, and they realized that the situation was becoming critical. After a short discussion, the two of them decided to hide under the armored vehicle, believing that the drone would not be able to fly under it and would be more vulnerable inside. The third Russian soldier decided to stay inside the armored vehicle, considering it safer. As soon as two Russian soldiers climbed under the armored vehicle, a Ukrainian FPV drone began to attack. The drone quickly flew inside the armored vehicle and caused a powerful explosion. There was excellent news from the Donetsk direction, namely, the Ukrainian military managed to destroy two Russian Buk-3 anti-aircraft missile systems using a HIMARS multiple launch rocket system in the suburbs of the city of Settlers. The video begins with a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone spotting two Russian Buk anti-aircraft missile systems. These complexes were deployed to protect nearby units of the Brigade and Airborne Division headquarters of the Russian troops. There was excellent news from the Cherson direction, namely fighters of the 126th Separate Brigade of the Territorial Defense Forces and the 79th Border Detachment showed the moment how, with the help of FPV drones, they destroyed the positions of Russian drone operators who were launching their FPV drones from the balcony. The Ukrainian military reportedly showed drone footage of Russian drone operators hiding in one of the houses of local residents. Further, in the footage shown, we can see how one Russian drone operator goes out onto the balcony and launches his FPV drone in an unknown direction. After this, the Ukrainian military begins an attack using an FPV drone, which strikes the balcony of the house where the Russian FPV drone operators are hiding. He was followed by several more strikes on different balconies, where there were also Russian military personnel. As a result, after being hit by an FPV drone, a powerful explosion occurs, as a result of which the explosion causes heavy damage to all Russian operators who were hiding in the house of local residents. After the explosion, everyone was injured, after which they no longer posed a threat to the Ukrainian military. There was excellent news from the Kharkov direction, namely, the pilots of attack drones of the 43rd Separate Mechanized Brigade showed an impressive moment when a Russian infantry fighting vehicle with infantry tried to break through the Ukrainian defense line near the village of Ivanovka, but was destroyed with the help of FPV drones. The video begins with a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone capturing the movement of a Russian infantry fighting vehicle accompanied by a group of armored soldiers on top. When the Russian infantry fighting vehicle was in the affected area, the Ukrainian pilots decided to attack. Using FPV drones equipped with explosive devices, they carried out a precise strike against armored vehicles and soldiers. The first drone successfully reached its target, causing an explosion that disabled the infantry fighting vehicle and scattered the infantry. The explosion was so powerful that the armored vehicle instantly caught fire, and Russian soldiers began to run away in panic. The video shows how the second FPV drone rushes towards the target, finishing off those who tried to take cover after the first strike. The explosion of the second drone was no less destructive than the first. Ukrainian pilots acted quickly and decisively, not giving the enemy a chance to regroup or counterattack. Russian soldiers, deprived of support and equipment, found themselves in a hopeless situation. There was excellent news from the Donetsk direction, namely, the fighters of the 72nd Separate Mechanized Brigade Bulava and the Shadow Unit demonstrated an impressive moment of destroying a Russian infantry fighting vehicle which was on its way to evacuate its wounded comrades. This additional protection in the form of a welded iron barbecue onto the armor received its name among the military for its external resemblance to this item. The purpose of such a barbecue is to repel attacks from anti-tank missile systems, but in practice it turned out to be ineffective. Not much time passed before the Ukrainian military, noticing the movement of the infantry fighting vehicles, decided to use the Javelin anti-tank missile system. The rocket launch was accurate and confident. The moment the missile hit the target, a powerful explosion occurred. The crew of the Russian infantry fighting vehicle tried to escape and scattered, but the evacuation of the wounded for which they were heading now became impossible. Until a new evacuation vehicle arrives, the wounded Russian soldiers may not survive to receive help, making their losses even more significant.
As you can see, the Javelin missile hit the last tank in the column, which immediately exploded. From this recently published video by the 47th Brigade of the Ukrainian Army, we can understand this. As soon as a Russian tank reaches the outskirts of the town, it is met by a swarm of Ukrainian FPV drones. Notice that the Russian anti-drone defense, which is certainly present on their tanks, proves to be useless. Notice the smart tactics of the Ukrainian soldiers. The first drone hits the Russian tank in the engine compartment to stop it. The second drone targets the tank's observation systems mounted on the turret. And once the tank is immobilized, the third drone carefully selects a target point to set the tank on fire. The operator looks for the spot where it will be easiest to penetrate the tank's armor and ignite the space inside the turret. But the second Russian tank that entered the same town couldn't withstand even a single hit from an FPV drone. The Ukrainians equipped the drone with a special munition featuring an enhanced shaped charge. It is capable of penetrating the armor of any Russian tank. The drone is attacking. Incredible. Just one hit caused all the ammunition in the tank to detonate, and its turret was blown off the chassis. You could spend a long time watching the burning remains of the Russian tank and pondering why this happened. But we are moving on. The Russians are desperately trying to capture the city of Vovchansk in the Kharkiv region. They are sending column after column of tanks there, but so far, they haven't achieved significant success. Watch how the Ukrainians repel the attack of the Russian armored column. First, drones hit the tanks as they approach the town. The first tank is stopped. The second tank is stopped. The third tank is stopped. The fourth drone hits an APC carrying infantry. This Russian T-90 tank hit a mine during the attack on the town and was abandoned by its crew. A Ukrainian drone flies directly into the open hatch of the tank, setting it on fire. Another T-80 tank was abandoned on the outskirts of the town. It took a powerful hit from a Ukrainian drone and immediately caught fire. But after some time, all the ammunition inside it exploded. Not far from there, another Russian APC was found and destroyed. As you can see, the Russians have to suffer huge losses to make any progress. Many of you ask, if it's true that the Russians are losing so much armored equipment, why are they winning the war? The answer is simple. The Russians are advancing only due to their massive numbers of armored vehicles and soldiers. The Ukrainians are destroying thousands of tanks, but the Russians send thousands more into battle. They are winning by sheer numbers. That's why Western assistance is so crucial for Ukraine. Now watch what happens when Russian infantry manage to break into the town. This Russian APC delivered infantry into the town. The Ukrainians destroyed it with a single grenade, but now they need to find the group of Russian soldiers and prevent them from establishing a foothold here. Sometimes tanks handle this task well, but sometimes heavy bombs are needed. Look, in this multi-story building, reconnaissance has detected a concentration of enemy infantry. It was decided to carry out an airstrike with a precision-guided bomb. The result is satisfactory. Let's do it again. Look at this powerful Russian weapon. This is the Iskander multi-purpose missile system. It launches high-precision cruise and ballistic missiles. The Russians never spare urban buildings and readily wipe a city off the map. And now, I want to show you a completely different front, where recently, the Ukrainians successfully destroyed valuable pieces of Russian weaponry. Look, this is a Russian 2S-19 self-propelled howitzer. It can launch shells at a distance of over 25 kilometers. One of these howitzers was hit by an FPV drone in the Donetsk region. The howitzer caught fire, and the Russians started to panic. The nearby fuel truck quickly left the location. The soldiers also ran away, realizing that the ammunition was about to detonate. And they were right. The howitzer exploded! The next target is a loading vehicle for the Russian Oregon MLRS. It has just delivered ammunition. This time, the Ukrainians use a HIMARS rocket. A precise hit. The ammunition starts detonating and the location is destroyed. And this is a more expensive target, the Russian Buk M3 air defense system. This weapon is dangerous for Ukrainian aviation and can shoot down fighter jets within a radius of up to 25 kilometers. To hit this important target, the Ukrainians used a kamikaze drone with a powerful warhead. After the hit, the Buk M3 burned until it was completely disabled. Unfortunately, the Russians tracked it and destroyed it using the Lancet kamikaze drone. This led to the detonation of all the ammunition in the installation. Here we have the video confirmation of the destruction of another Ukrainian installation. You can see the Grad BM taking its position among the green trees, but Russian reconnaissance is already tracking it. Once again, the Russians use a Lancet drone. The target is destroyed along with its ammunition, and shortly thereafter, the Russians destroyed another Grad BM. Thus, Ukraine has lost at least 3 Grad BM MLRS units near Kharkiv. The Russian Lancet drone is very dangerous. It can penetrate up to 40 kilometers into Ukrainian territory. In this video, you can see a Ukrainian fuel truck burning after being hit by a Lancet drone right at a gas station. But let's hope that the Ukrainians will soon find a way to counter these insidious Russian drones.
Just yesterday, I was a builder in Kiev, and now I'm the commander of an artillery brigade. Fire! We're fighting for our country, so that scum doesn't come crawling to us. We have our children and our parents here, and we want them to live in peace and tranquility.
While attacking, the Russians fire from tanks. But for every shot, they receive incoming projectiles or get hit by FPV drone strikes. Sometimes Ukrainians use various types of anti-tank missiles. Overall, luck is not on their side. The Ukrainians repel another Russian attack, destroying all Russian tanks and APCs. No tank manages to survive during the attack. They all, without exception, will be destroyed. We've seen dozens of destroyed tanks just in the last week. By the way, this one was burned by an American M67 grenade. Thanks to the American people for the powerful weapon. And now, take a look at the work of these 2 Ukrainian soldiers. Together, they managed to destroy numerous Russian armored vehicles using FPV drones. Their first capture was a Russian infantry fighting vehicle loaded with ammunition. Great job! Next, they repel the attack of Russian armored vehicles, not allowing them to break through. This Russian APC receives 2 drone strikes. Meanwhile, an artillery anti-infantry projectile explodes nearby. The Russians continue their attack but lose another APC, possibly detonated by a mine. When the Russians began to maneuver, the Ukrainians destroyed the lead tank with an anti-tank missile. Then, 2 kamikaze drones destroyed another armored vehicle. After that, the Russians stopped attacking as they suffered heavy losses. When the attack is halted, the Russians scatter in all directions. After the failed attack, the battlefield is strewn with damaged tanks and APCs. But many tanks and armored vehicles still remain undamaged on the battlefield. Therefore, drone operators are persistently working to destroy all Russian weaponry. And of course, Russian trucks delivering ammunition to the front are also systematically destroyed. This video is evidence of the first case where Russians managed to hit the American HIMARS rocket artillery system. The HIMARS was spotted not far from the front line. To hit the American rocket artillery system, the Russians used a super powerful ballistic missile Iskander. After such a missile, the HIMARS is guaranteed to be destroyed. In 2 years of war, they have only destroyed 1 unit. But the Russians were very happy and consider it a great achievement. Another tank was also destroyed using a shaped charge shell. All ammunition in the tank detonated. Some Russian soldiers, seeing their armored vehicles burning and exploding, try to flee the battlefield at high speed. However, the Ukrainian FPV drone easily catches up with them. In fear, the Russians abandon the APC, forgetting to turn off the engine, but continue running after it. It looks both funny and sad at the same time. When the APC finally stalled, the Ukrainians finished it off. The Ukrainian army has left the city of Avdiivka. For over 4 months, the Russians besieged this city and finally captured it. In the last few days, they dropped hundreds of heavy FAB-500 bombs on the city, making it practically uninhabitable. After the explosion of such a bomb, any building is destroyed to its foundations. The loss of Avdiivka doesn't change anything strategically on the front. It's not even noticeable on the general map. But it took the Russians 4 months to capture the town. During this time, they lost nearly 50,000 people, 1,112 tanks and armored fighting vehicles, and a lot of other equipment. For the Russians, this is a Pyrrhic victory. Putin needed this town at any cost so that he could offer something to the people as a victory before the March elections. Therefore, Ukrainian forces are withdrawing from Avdiivka and will continue to destroy Russian military equipment in open terrain. In conditions of a shortage of artillery ammunition, the Ukrainian army relies more on FPV drones than usual. On some front lines, drones have completely replaced artillery. Fortunately, the Ukrainians are currently successfully holding back the enemy's advance, taking advantage of the moment. While the US is not supplying ammunition to Ukraine, the Russians attempt to attack even at night. Once again, Ukrainian forces stop them using drones equipped with night vision devices. In the morning, the Ukrainians continue to burn the Russian armored vehicles they destroyed during the night. Sometimes, there are so many tanks and APCs that the battlefield becomes a smoke-filled landfill. Every attack comes at a very high cost for the Russians. Russian soldiers who abandoned their armored vehicles on the battlefield face a survival test. The smart ones try to negotiate with the drones while the foolish ones run away. Ukrainian drones are hunting them down. Some of them hide under the damaged armored vehicles, but Ukrainian drone operators are aware of this and skillfully direct their drones right at the target. It's reminiscent of the Squid Game from the Korean series. Trucks are not harmless transportation and are also subject to destruction. They are an important part of Russian logistics, delivering ammunition to the front line. But there is another danger from the Russians, the so-called roaming tanks or lone tanks. A column of tanks is easy to notice, but a single Russian tank can sometimes sneak very close to a Ukrainian bunker to destroy it. To prevent this, Ukrainians carefully track such tanks from the air and immediately destroy them. In this video, you can see one of the roaming tanks. A Ukrainian drone easily ignited it. The tank burned for a long time, and its fuel spilled onto the ground. But eventually, the tank exploded. All that was left of it was just small scattered pieces of metal. This Russian roaming tank, the T-72, was halted during the night. In the morning, the Ukrainians struck it with an FPV drone. One drone proved to be enough to make the tank burn and render it useless. Russians are increasingly employing the tactic of roaming tanks, trying to operate more discreetly.
To the north of Bakhmut, Ukrainian forces also have to hold back the Russian troops' advance. Russians send infantry and tanks. This tank attempted to break through, but got stuck in a trench. Shortly after, it was hit by a Ukrainian drone and exploded a few minutes later. Look at this Russian MLRS, Soltsepek. The crew was tasked with shelling Ukrainian positions, but the Soltsepek was hit by a Ukrainian drone before it could launch its rockets. Now, it's exploding with its ammunition. And Ukrainian soldiers are watching and recording the spectacle. This Russian APC was packed with explosives and sent towards Ukrainian positions to destroy their bunker. However, the Ukrainians destroyed it before it reached its target. This is a common practice among Russian forces, and I've shown you several instances of it before. Here, the Russians also lost numerous tanks. Burning abandoned tanks is a favorite pastime of Ukrainian soldiers. It's like a game. First, you have to accurately drop a grenade into the narrow opening of the tank turret, and then record a video of the tank burning for us to watch. Many young Ukrainian guys who enjoy playing computer games happily work as drone operators, partly because this job offers many spectacular moments. Sometimes, there are so many abandoned tanks that destroying them can take an entire working day, from early morning until late evening, leaving Russians with no chance of advancing. Let's give a thumbs up to the Ukrainian drone operators. They certainly deserve it. These guys handle aerial reconnaissance, providing target information for the HIMARS launcher team. They have suitable drones and all the necessary equipment for the job. Their goal is to identify enemy military vehicles and relay the coordinates to the HIMARS crew. This reconnaissance drone can soar high into the sky and hover above the clouds. Its optics allow it to spot targets within a 10-kilometer radius. The first target is quickly found. It's the Russian state-of-the-art 1K-148 electronic warfare station. This machine is used for enemy artillery reconnaissance, and its cost can exceed $200 million. However, just one HIMARS missile destroys this valuable Russian weapon. Among the pines, the Russians hit a Grad BM-21 along with ammunition. The HIMARS missile turns the target into a fiery stone. Unfortunately, we only regret the innocent trees. Next, aerial reconnaissance spotted the 2 S-4 self-propelled mortar in a truck with ammunition. Just one HIMARS missile renders them no longer usable. 2 self-propelled howitzers, Nona, were also destroyed by one HIMARS missile. Russian anti-aircraft missile system, Strela-10. The Buk anti-aircraft missile system. Mobile command post on wheeled chassis. Field warehouse with ammunition. Near Avdiivka, the Russians are also losing a significant amount of armored vehicles. After a failed attack, Ukrainians burn all abandoned tanks and APCs. It's important to do this so that the Russians cannot evacuate this armor for repairs. The tanks that manage to enter the populated area are also destroyed. The equipment must be burned to ensure the enemy can no longer use it. Out of helplessness and anger, Russians resort to dropping incendiary phosphorus munitions. Russians launched new senseless attacks, hoping to capture at least one more village for their dictator, Putin. Putin has equipped them with tanks and ammunition, but hasn't provided them with intelligence. Look at this group of APCs. None of them managed to reach the village. They were all burned by Ukrainian drones. Any advancement comes at too high a cost for the Russians. They must regret their invasion of Ukraine every day. But the Russians continue to attack the village of Robotyno from different directions. Take a look at this footage. A tank and an APC are advancing towards the village, but Ukrainian FPV drones are one step ahead. First, the APC was stopped by 2 strikes, and then the drone targeted the tank. Another drone dropped a grenade on the immobilized tank, causing it to catch fire. From the same direction, the Russians intended to use the Solnspek MLRS, a rocket-propelled flamethrower artillery system. But the Ukrainian FPV drone destroyed it along with its ammunition load. Let's give a big thumbs up for the skillful work of the Ukrainian drone operator. Take a look at another Russian attack. This time, the leading APC hit a mine. The second APC was subsequently abandoned and destroyed by a Ukrainian FPV drone. Watch how the main parts of the armored vehicle fly off. This attack failed. Take a look at another Russian attack. This tank is trying to break through under the strikes of Ukrainian artillery. At some point, one of the shells hits the tank. After a while, the Russians sent a second tank to attack the same position. The tank managed to make several shots, but then was hit by a Ukrainian FPV drone. Then 2 more drones finished off the tank. At this location, the Russians lost several tanks over the course of several days. This Russian T-80 tank received several hits from drones, but in the end, it was left without a turret. Nearby, another abandoned Russian APC was found. With the help of a single drone armed with a shaped charge warhead, it was ignited from the inside, resulting in a spectacular fire. The next day, another tank was set on fire, followed by the destruction of another APC. Aren't these wonderful results achieved by Ukrainian soldiers? Watch how skillfully the Ukrainian FPV drone, resembling a bee, selects its target for the strike. It managed to ignite the new Russian APC on the first attempt. Similar scenes are unfolding on other parts of the front line. For every kilometer they advance, the Russians lose hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles as well as thousands of soldiers. Losing equipment at such a rate, Russians will need at least 50 years to win this war. In 2 years of full-scale warfare, they haven't achieved a single one of their goals. Not a single one. Another interesting fact: when Russian soldiers abandon their armored vehicles, they usually seek shelter from Ukrainian FPV drones. This could be trenches or partially destroyed buildings. However, Ukrainian defenders have devised special ammunition with an incendiary mixture. Attacking Russians with such weapons literally sends them into hell. And all of this is to make Russians regret their invasion of Ukraine every single day.
Also, what's even more important, Ukrainian forces are striking Russian territory daily. Here's another example of how a massive tank attack was repelled solely by FPV drones. In January of this year, the Russians attacked Avdiivka from different directions. The Russians deployed dozens of tanks and armored vehicles, but the Ukrainians were prepared for this attack and had stocked up on a sufficient number of FPV drones. To repel a large-scale attack, it's crucial to have various combinations of mini drones, but most importantly, to have at least a few drones equipped with shaped charge warheads.
Таких шершнів диких. Вони реально дикі. Вони реально дикі. І жаль вони, дай Боже.
This is necessary to explode at least a few tanks and intimidate the Russians. Then they are more likely to abandon their armored vehicles and flee. The sight of a blown-up tank on the battlefield really sends shivers down the spine. So the Russians abandon their tanks and flee, unwilling to be caught in a burning tank. In that case, Ukrainians can save on FPV drones. After all, abandoned tanks can be set on fire in a simpler way, by tossing a grenade into the hatch, and that is usually sufficient. So, when the Russians attack, the main goal is to blow up one or several of their tanks. Then, they start to panic and scatter, abandoning their armored vehicles on the battlefield. After that, this armor can be destroyed using cheaper FPV drones or by throwing grenades. The drones hover over the battlefield like wasps and destroy one tank after another until they burn them all down. This is what modern warfare looks like. Later, Ukrainians found 2 more brand new Russian tanks abandoned by the Russians out of fear. A drone ignited one of the tanks, causing it to burn like a torch, so that the Russians could see from a distance that their attack had failed. Here's another example of how a drone equipped with a regular grenade can outmatch a tank. This Russian tank attacked a Ukrainian bunker and received a drone strike directly into the tank's engine compartment. As a result, the tank became immobilized. The Russians fired 2 more shots, after which they had to abandon the tank and flee. Of course, later, the Ukrainians set fire to the abandoned tank. And finally, I want to show you another Russian attack that was thwarted solely by drones. This took place near Avdiivka in January of this year. The Russians behaved strangely and disorganized right from the start of the attack. They themselves damaged one of their tanks without an obvious reason. But when they entered the gray zone and began to approach the Ukrainian positions, a swarm of Ukrainian drones simply started destroying them one by one. The Ukrainians managed to reach and strike with a drone even the tank that the Russians had damaged before the battle. About half an hour later, all the Russian tanks were knocked out and ablaze. The battlefield was shrouded in smoke.
But let's get back to shape-charged projectiles. Interestingly, the Ukrainian algorithm works not only against Russian tanks, but also against any Russian armored vehicles. Take a look. The Russian APC-3 is carrying out a combat mission, attacking, firing at Ukrainian trenches, probably loaded with ammunition. But the Ukrainian FPV drone sneaked up from behind and hits it right in the turret. The APC exploded along with the ammunition. The shape-charged projectile easily penetrates the armor of any Russian armored vehicle. And this is the Russian self-propelled howitzer 2S-19. The FPV drone with a shape-charged projectile hits the howitzer from the front. The strike causes an instantaneous detonation of the ammunition. The drone easily penetrates the armor of the howitzer. Even if an immediate explosion doesn't occur, it will happen minutes later. Whether it's a howitzer or a tank, or even an abandoned but loaded with ammunition known as howitzer. But my favorite is the destruction of the Russian multiple launch rocket system, Solntsepak, which uses reactive thermobaric missiles. Look, this video was shot last summer. Solntsepak is on a combat mission. The installation is fully loaded with 24 rockets. The Ukrainian FPV drone hits it directly in the ignition mechanism. As a result of the hit, all the rockets exploded. And this case is even more impressive. Ukrainian intelligence found the Russian Solntsepak preparing to launch rockets. It was decided to use an FPV drone with a shape-charged projectile. The drone strike caused an immediate detonation of the entire ammunition of the enemy installation, turning it into a large fireball. This Solntsepak is also heading to a firing position for rocket launches. But a Ukrainian drone is hunting it, and as we see, the drone is armed with a suitable projectile. The result of the hit turned out to be very impressive. And this specimen was hit right during the rocket launch. In the same way, you can destroy the Grad MLRS. In this video, we see the Russian Grad BM-21 launches several rockets and then move to the next firing position. But on its way, it is intercepted by a Ukrainian drone. Upon impact, the remaining ammunition in the installation detonates. Using a combination of an FPV drone and a shape-charged projectile, Ukrainians have destroyed hundreds of Russian tanks and numerous other valuable military vehicles. When Ukrainians attached a shape-charged projectile from an RPG-7 to a drone, it became a real breakthrough in military tactics. This 2.5 kilogram projectile can penetrate armor up to 50 millimeters thick, meaning any Russian tank. Its use almost always results in the instant destruction of the tank and the removal of its turret. Now observe how the method of waging war has evolved over the past 2 years. At the beginning of the war, we all thought that the most critical weapon to repel Russian tanks was the Javelin anti-tank system. Now, we see how Ukrainian soldiers managed to stop any Russian tank with just FPV drones. A bit later, it was considered that artillery was the most crucial weapon in the confrontation between the two armies. But now, we begin to understand that FPV drones even have an advantage over artillery. Drones move faster than tanks, maneuver excellently, and hit targets with high precision. You can hide from artillery shells in a trench or bunker, while hiding from an FPV drone is impossible anywhere. Like these, they can fly into even the smallest openings and destroy the enemy's live forces. Moreover, any FPV drone with explosives will not exceed the cost of $1,000, while any Western projectile costs more than $50,000, and the Javelin ATGM cost over $80,000. Mentioning the high maneuverability of FPV drones, note how skillfully they fly into Russian armored vehicles and detonate them. Artillery is incapable of such actions. Understanding how the rules of warfare had changed, both Ukrainians and Russians have ramped up the mass production of these FPV drones. Even if Ukraine stops receiving artillery ammunition and javelins, it can continue repelling Russian attacks for a long time, solely with the help of drones. Watch this video. an FPV drone narrowly missed hitting a Russian Su-25 fighter jet. The aircraft managed to evade the drone at the last moment. Here, we see how a Ukrainian FPV drone narrowly avoided colliding with the Russian Ka-52 helicopter. There's no doubt that in the near future, Ukrainians will be downing Russian frontline aviation with drones. Russian aviation has to fly at low altitudes to avoid being targeted by air defense systems, but flying low makes them vulnerable to Ukrainian FPV drones. Russians filmed on the same road where the column of their armored vehicles was destroyed, and we can see the losses they suffered. Russian tanks always burn well. This Russian T-80 tank was hit by a Ukrainian FPV drone. Upon impact, it exploded into small pieces. On the way to Avdiivka, the Russians are losing a lot of their equipment even before reaching the battlefield. The road is strewn with destroyed tanks and APCs, making it practically impossible to pass unnoticed. This Russian APC is no exception. For those who manage to get past this road, defeat awaits on the battlefield, as happens to this armored vehicle. It was hit by an FPV drone and later exploded. Two more Russian APCs with infantry were on a mission. The first armored vehicle was hit by a Javelin missile, while the crew of the second APC was figuring out what to do. The Ukrainians struck them with an FPV drone. Another Russian APC was hit and didn't make it to the battlefield. Ukrainian soldiers have learned to use the Bradley very effectively in counterattacks, but more and more often, they refuse to use tanks of Russian origin, and here's why. Watch this video. During a counterattack, a Ukrainian T-72 tank, which is a tank of Russian origin, is blown up on a Russian mine along with ammunition. You can understand for yourself what happened to the crew of this tank. Western tanks like Leopard, Challenger, or Abrams may not be perfect and also have vulnerabilities, but at least they guarantee the lives of their crews. Look at how skillfully Ukrainian soldiers using Javelin missiles destroyed an advancing column of Russian armored vehicles. 3 out of 4 APCs were hit. All infantry attacks were repelled, so Russians began using artillery, particularly the BM-21 Grad. Look! This is a Russian Su-25 aircraft, and this is a Russian Grad multiple rocket launcher firing Russian rockets. There are only a few meters between the fighter and the missile. If the plane had flown a fraction of a second faster, it would have been shot down. The Russian Grad MLRS launches a rocket strike against Ukrainian targets, but was destroyed by a HIMARS missile. Take a look at how it looks from distance. The explosion was so powerful that nothing remained of the Russian MLRS except for a crater in the ground. This is archival footage from September of last year. It shows another BM-21 Grad MLRS explosion along with its ammunition. Ukrainian reconnaissance found a large depot with rocket ammunition. With the help of an FPV drone, the depot was hit and exploded a few minutes later. Reconnaissance also discovered a pile of Russian anti-tank mines. It remains a mystery why the Russians leave their mines exposed, scattered on the ground and without cover. But this doesn't stop Ukrainian drones from turning Russian mines into a fiery inferno. Numerous discovered Russian mines also take off into the air. The American MLRS HIMARS continues to work successfully on the front lines, destroying many Russian artillery systems daily. In collaboration with reconnaissance, the self-propelled howitzer 2S5 was destroyed. And here's a highly valuable Russian weapon,
The Buk surface-to-air missile system. Just one HIMARS missile turns it into a New Year's fireworks show. Having such a moment, I congratulate you to the arrival of 2024. This is the Russian OSA anti-aircraft missile system. The Russians barely had time to hide between the trees before being hit by a HIMARS missile. Here, the Russians concealed the self-propelled howitzer Tu-S-19. But is it possible to hide from Ukrainian reconnaissance? Of course not. The howitzer was also hit by a HIMARS missile, destroyed by fire. At night, Russians dared to use the TOS-1 Buratino MLRS, which fires thermobaric projectiles. This weapon has a range of only 6 kilometers. Russians need to get as close as possible to Ukrainian positions, but reconnaissance detected the MLRS, and with the help of a HIMARS missile, the target was destroyed. This is what the destruction of TOS-1 Buratino looks like during the day. And like this. Another TOS-1 Buratino was also destroyed at night. FPV drones have practically replaced 122mm and 155mm artillery. That's why they are so important, and their production needs to be increased. Unlike conventional artillery, drones have incredible maneuverability and precision. In this example, see how it works. Ukrainians tried to hit a Russian tank with conventional artillery shells, but they fall short without damaging the tank. However, a few seconds later, the tank was hit by an FPV drone, forcing the Russians to abandon the tank and hide among the trees. In today's episode, you will see new videos of how Ukrainians repel waves of Russian attacks. You will witness dozens of destroyed and burning tanks and armored vehicles. Perhaps the Russians have never faced such fierce resistance as they did last week. So let's begin.